Hey everyone, this is Alex Shartzis with Seed to Sequoia. Excited to bring you this coaching snack this Monday. Last week we talked to Sean Burns. He's a shrewd operator, great advisor and investor, and had a lot to share. So most founders set out to build the category leader, and few actually succeed. Sean is one of those few. Yeah, he started out building an email app for phones back in the early 2000s, in 2005, before iPhone was invented and released, and pivoted when iPhone came out to doing analytics, which was something that they found really important. And that became the leading analytics and ad platform for mobile. It's hard to understate how many companies used Flurry. Pretty much every major mobile company in the beginning of iPhone was on Flurry. It was screenshotted for board meetings at every level. It was insanely successful. And Yahoo bought it in the mid 2010s. Sean's conversation was great. We covered a lot of ground. I think a few of the highlights for me were really around just some of his insights as he plays 3D chess while the rest of us are playing checkers. So everything really centered on his focus on the customer. So, early on, making sure when you start out that if you can't find a problem that people viscerally need to solve, nothing else really matters. And so I think a lot of people that I work with and that I see are trying to figure out a go-to-market motion or some other thing for something that people don't even really want or really need. And that, that's just, it's a hard row to hoe. It's almost easier to stop, go do something else. And I think that was a key insight. There were a lot of other insights that came out of this, everything from enterprise being easier because you need to do less customer development, right? If you're selling for $100,000 a pop, you don't need as many customers as if you're selling for $10 a pop. So, you can do, while you might need to talk to 100 people to do consumer, you might, if you get positive responses, you might only need to talk to 10 or 20 or 30 for enterprise. And so, we talked a lot about that and how enterprise can be a different sales motion and can be easier in some cases. We talked a lot about the positive indicators of a team. So I think one of the big ones was doing your homework. So having those customer conversations. Sean is, like many of our guys, really big on actually talking to customers and making sure you understand your market. It's remarkable how few people do their actual homework, right? They get one buyer and they're like, great, this must be a market, let's go, versus talking to many people in the same space to really understand whether the market is, whether they just got lucky the first time or whether there really is a market there. I think one of the big positive indicators we talked about was actually listening. So did you hear feedback and change your plans, or did you hear the feedback, ignore it, keep doing what you're doing anyway? I know I made that mistake. I think it's a very common mistake. And so really being open, not so attached to what you've built, but being open to understanding what your customers are talking about and asking for. Whether or not you build exactly what they ask for is a different question, but actually understanding how that fits with your plans and your world viewpoint, as opposed to just trying to fit what they said into your existing plan. Too many companies are focused on their pitch deck or focused on their sales pitch. And so they take what the customers or the prospects say and just pervert that into fitting their story versus realizing that maybe there's a different story that they should be following. And that actually is a great segue into something else we talked about, which was using funding to force things to work. So in the 2020 era, when money was almost free, quite literally in some cases free, you ended up with people just throwing money at the problem. There's a great podcast about how the CFO started at one of the delivery startups and how they realized they were losing $14 on every order. And I believe that was Instacart. And at $14 on every order, nobody even realized that except for the controller. And people were relatively fine with it. You can do that when you have billions of dollars in the bank, but that's not really a business. And so I think it's very easy. It was easy in that time to lose sight of that, right? Focus on the next fundraise, as opposed to focusing on making a business that you put $1 in and you get more than $1 out of. I think that it's just really important to remember that. As a founder, raising more venture money is not actually success. Raising more venture money is, might be some sort of a byproduct or an indicator that you're on a successful path. But the path that matters is, building a business where you can invest $1 and get more than $1 out of. I think, it's just important to not forget that. And Sean's run a bunch of businesses, some have done incredibly well, some have not, but that he always comes back to that, building a business and not just raising venture as an activity. So what was counterintuitive was big on the enterprise front was the big enterprises don't like buying from founder CEOs. I think a lot of founders think, oh, I'm the CEO. I can go talk to this, big Fortune 500 customer and they'll be impressed. They're talking to the CEO. And in fact, it is always the opposite. They're used to buying from salespeople. And so when you show up as a CEO, they're professionals. They're going to grind you. There's no man behind the curtain. You're the decision maker. They're not doing you any favors. These are professionals at buying stuff when you get into the procurement companies, the procurement departments at large companies. And so don't delude yourself into thinking because you're a founder, you're something special. Like they chew up founders and eat them for breakfast. So we talked a lot about how you can manage that, how you can build a team around that, how to be successful in enterprise sales. We also debunked some myths, like hiring 2 salespeople at once. Not a good idea in either of our opinion. Hiring people that think that they're hunters, but really are just sitting at a Sizzler with unlimited steak showing up at their table. There are a lot of really poor performers that are great people on paper that came from Google, they came from YouTube, they came from Amazon. That they seem like they'd be great, but in fact are not actually great because the environment they were successful in is very different than the environment you can offer them. And so really thinking about that and being aware of that in your interview process and your hiring process. I think one of the things that was a great lesson for me was this negative mindedness. So the biggest negative indicator Sean talked about for any hire was negative mindedness. Are people whining about not having something that they need to succeed? And again, this is most prevalent in big company hires where I'm used to having somebody to build my sales decks. I'm used to having somebody to make my cold calls. I'm used to having a pipeline of people that show up on the website. So even though you have the best pedigree in the world and you were a director at Facebook or something, you might suffer from this negative mindedness because you're used to a lot of things that you don't have and you're not willing to adapt and thrive in a new environment. And that's it. Creates terrible culture and needs to be rooted out as quickly as possible. One of the other things we talked about in the good advice column was peer support. So talking to your peers, that is other founder CEOs. I know Sean and I are in a group here in the San Francisco Bay Area that's incredibly helpful, especially when I was navigating COVID, or we were both navigating COVID at our companies. Incredibly helpful to have that resource of peers who you can talk to. Whether you get that through advisors, whether you get it through your investor network, but these are other CEOs. These aren't investors. These aren't VCs. They're other CEOs that you can talk to. So I highly encourage you to listen to the Sean episode, Sean Burns on Seed to Sequoia. That was last week. This week, let's talk about coaching stuff first. So before we talk about who our next guest is. So I think one of the things that I always ask is, what did you get done last week? And was it what you set out to do? It's fine to be derailed. It's fine to do other stuff. Usually, whether or not it was a conscious choice, you were working on the most important thing, but maybe not. I would just take a moment, reflect. Was it what you set out to do? Was it the most important thing? And don't be judgy, I think. One of the things I realized was when I joined a company as CRO, there were a bunch of collections issues. Right. And it seemed like a waste of time. Like we needed to be growing. We needed to be doing other stuff. But once I dug, I realized that figuring out billing and collections was actually a really important existential part of the company. It can be true if you're just trying to collect a big check, big payment from a customer. Nothing is necessarily the wrong thing to be focused on. But I think it's important to be thoughtful about what you're focused on and then hold yourself accountable. Did I actually do the thing that I set out to do this week? And even if that thing took you 5 minutes, but it was a hard conversation, great. That's a win. Then think about what you're going to do this week, right? And just 1 to 3 things. Again, don't make a to-do list that's a mile long. Pick 1 to 3 really big things you're going to get done. Yeah, you'll get done the little things done on the way, but pick those things that are going to be mile markers on your journey that are actual forward motion and not just, oh, I filed some immigration paperwork. which, by the way, is my favorite thing to knock because immigration sucks from a bureaucratic standpoint. So this week, in terms of things to think about, what I'm going to start doing is adding in a coaching idea. So some concept or thing to think about for you for the week that might prove useful. Based on the conversation with Sean, I thought listening is a really good one to start with. So a lot of my coaches have coached me about listening. Obviously, this is 10 minutes of me talking nonstop, so not a great example. But I think that one of the things that I think is really important is this concept of listening. So when you're listening, there are different kinds of listening. And I think it's important to distinguish, right? If you're listening in order to argue with somebody, you're listening for things that help your argument or hurt their argument, right? That support you, that don't support you. You might tune them out once you find one of those things. Now you're thinking about how do I formulate my response, and you're not really listening anymore. So I think there are different kinds of listening. The Conscious Leadership Institute, which is something that I did some coaching with and definitely subscribe to in terms of their philosophy, talks about being committed to curiosity, right? And so if you're committed to being curious, the opposite of that is being committed to being right? And so if I'm arguing or listening for things that support my point of view, that support me being right, I'm not really curious. I'm not really hearing and understanding what that person is saying. And so I think it's really helpful when you think about listening, not just to listen, but to actually be curious, listen for the purpose of understanding as opposed to for some other purpose, like proving your product works, raising money, getting them to invest. Those are not the same as being curious. There may or may not be a time and place, but usually you get there faster if you're curious. So tactics to help you listen, the best one that I've ever found is to ask questions. So if the things that come out of your mouth are questions, you're forced to listen because you ask a question, and unless you're really pedantic, you're going to listen to the answer. And I don't know if you have kids or if you have a spouse or a business partner, but one fun way to practice asking questions is to play the question game. Question game is infuriating, but it's actually pretty fun, and it's pretty fun to see how long you can go just asking questions. The question game is where you can't make a statement. Everything you say has to be a question. And I think it teaches you to frame things that you would have thought would be statements into questions. Like instead of saying the product costs $1,000, you could say, what if I said the product costs $1,000? Are we done playing the question game? Right? So you don't risk losing. So there's a lot in asking questions that helps you be a better listener. The other really big tactic for being a good listener or a great listener is to repeat back whatever somebody said in their own words or in a very close paraphrase. Because not only does it show that you're listening, so they think you're listening, whether or not you really are, it actually forces you to listen because you can't repeat back what they said without actually hearing it and listening to it. So listening as something to practice, it's great not only in sales, not only in fundraising, and not only in product development, but also managing your team. And I personally had a story where one of my teammates, when I was running Perfect Price, didn't think I listened. She ran engineering and she thought I was always trying to convince her to do something. And when I said, look, I'm trying to get better at listening, she really opened up and our relationship changed forever because she realized that I wasn't always there with an agenda trying to talk her into doing something, or talk the team into doing something. I was really curious about what we were doing, and I wasn't just asking her in order to have more ammo in my argument. I was asking her because I was genuinely curious, and that really changed our relationship for the better. So try listening, try asking questions, try and repeat what people said to you back to them. And you'll find yourself a better listener. All right, that wraps up today's snack. This Thursday, we're talking to Ronnie Roy. He's a startup lawyer who has some really interesting market insights and lots of tricks and tips for managing everything legal at a startup. I think that legal can sound boring, but this is the stuff that breaks companies if you get it wrong. Having acquired a bunch of companies and gone through the sales process, getting the legal stuff right is some of that 3D chess that Sean plays. It's not actually that hard if you have good advice, but it's really easy to not ask for advice at the right times or not listen to that advice. See also listening above. So Ronnie's on Thursday. We're really looking forward to that one. I think you really get a lot out of it. So please tune in wherever you get your podcasts on Seed to Sequoia. Apple, YouTube, Spotify, all the usual suspects. So with that, I'll sign off. Happy Monday. Hope you have a fun and productive week. Good luck out there.